Hey everyone, welcome. Today, we're diving into the world of committed use discounts, including savings plans and reserved instances. First, let's set the stage with a simple concept. Cloud costs are your rates multiplied by your usage. This means that you can lower your costs by using less or by locking in better rates than the list price, such as the on-demand or pay-as-you-go. Committed use discounts, they're a purchase strategy to save on rates by committing to consumption in exchange for discounts. Sounds pretty simple, right? Well, think about committed use discounts a little bit like choosing an investment strategy. You can get really granular and complex, build a portfolio based on your specific needs and goals, really maximize your savings. But you can also choose some products that are a little bit more simplified. They produce solid returns over time, require minimal nuance and management overhead. Maybe you don't save as much, but it's an option. So today, we're going to be talking about committed use discounts, and we brought together a panel of experts, FinOps experts, if you will. So folks that are practicing FinOps experts, working with all kinds of different customer environments, helping them understand spend, take into account any nuance, and build a strategic approach to making those purchases. So with that, I'm Joe, Solution Architect here at Vega Cloud, and I'm going to be moderating this panel discussion. I'm going to first start with some intros. Lisa, why don't you say hi to the team?
Hi, team. I'm Lisa, and I am a FinOps analyst, and I have the pleasure of covering some very different clients. I have a global client that's operating around the clock, and then I also have very small, tech companies as well. So I kind of get a nice view of the different challenges that different companies have when they're doing committed use discount.
Great. Thanks
Ryan?
for being here, Lisa. And
Sure.
Ryan, how about yourself?
Hey, everybody. My name is Ryan McIntyre. I am the Senior Technical Manager of FinOps at Vega. My background is actually in engineering. So I came to FinOps from the operations and engineering perspective. Kind of a different approach to things. I can see more of the technical ins and outs of it, how things are built, and I bring that kind of a lens to this.
Awesome. Thanks
If
for
I
being
may
here.
interrupt, I have a finance background, so I lean heavily on Ryan's expertise.
Well, outstanding. So we've got finance, we've got engineering. Michael, that tees you up. We've got the looks.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but I've got data. I'm Michael. I'm the Director of Technical Optimization here at Vega. I've been working with RIs for roughly 10 years now, helping a MSP start their hedging RIs. It's kind of how I got my start, and been doing it ever since.
Well, outstanding. Well, now that you've met all of us, the real reason for this is I've worked with the producer MJ, who's behind the scenes here. He pulled a few strings, and we've assembled this team, real Algonquin roundtable of FinOps expertise, really because I needed to learn a little bit more about committed use discounts myself. I figured what better way than to bring all the brains together from different points of view and talk about some of the questions we hear from clients all the time, and start with some basics, dig into a little bit more detail. So whether you're brand new to committed use discounts, what to do, or if you're already down a path and you are that person who likes to build a complex portfolio, we'll talk about some of the different hedges there. So with that, maybe the first question for the group, Ryan, for you, have you kicked this off? When we talk about cloud providers and committed use discounts, some use the term committed use discount, CUD, or you'll maybe see reserved instances, savings plans, different terms that are used. When you look at different cloud providers, how are you seeing how do they handle things differently? How do they handle them similarly? And do those change over time? Have you noticed anything? Any perspectives there?
Yeah, there's a couple of different ways that the cloud providers handle their discounts. AWS has two main functions. They have the savings plan and the reservation. Think of a savings plan as that's a gift card for the AWS compute store. So you prepay, you commit to a number that you're willing to spend, and then you can use that payment, that gift card on certain products from within the compute store. Okay. Or so maybe think of it like an ice cream shop. So you have your gift card, you go in, you can get a discount on any flavor of ice cream from the case. Okay. So a reservation is a little bit different. That's more like a coupon that's specific to one scoop of ice cream from a specific shop, from a specific location for a specific flavor. The discount's bigger and you can still use it before the coupon expires, but it's a little more nuanced. You can't use it everywhere. You can't use it on anything. It's only on a specific SKU. So those are the two main functions. Those do carry over into Azure and GCP as well. They call them a little bit, the naming schemes are a little bit different. So GCP has sustained usage discounts where you get a discount on it if things run for a significant part of the month. They essentially, you can pre-purchase this specific SKU or you can do the commitment level stuff. Now, one interesting thing is with Oracle Cloud, one of the new providers that's hit the market that we're seeing, they have like a monopoly money type scheme where you get Oracle Universal credits as part of your agreement. And you can use those credits on cloud stuff. You can use them on licensing on your on-prem infrastructure. So if you're running Oracle database in a data center somewhere, you can use your universal credits to offset some of those costs. So similar but different. Essentially, for this discussion, we'll probably be talking about reservations, the more specific version, and savings plan, the more broad version.
Cool. Well, Lisa, when you see a multi-cloud environment, what are some of the thoughts that go through your mind when you're starting to look at differences, or maybe even just help to normalize or create a common baseline of understanding, even though there's different cloud providers and these different savings instruments? Is it safe to assume that the conversation is mostly the same given these concepts, or are there nuances that you like to call out specifically? Some of the things like Ryan had mentioned. What should people be concerned about?
From my perspective, it's always about billing. What am I paying for? Conceptually, yes, these instruments function the same way, but the way the different cloud providers bill you, their different categories can be nuanced. For example, AWS, you have your CUR. They kind of spell everything out, but here's your upfront, here's what's amortized, this is what you pay. Azure's a little bit different. Azure has two completely separate billing files, and then they have something completely different for the API. So it takes a little bit more finessing to get to the truth behind not only what did you spend on day one, say the cash spend, but where did that spend go? Who did that go to? So that's what I would focus on as a difference between the three.
One thing to add to what Lisa was talking about with the different agreements is the different clouds treat your negotiated discounts differently. So when looking at AWS, for example, if I have an EDP discount, AWS is going to stack that discount with my committed use. For Azure is not necessarily going to stack it. So there are cases where I've seen it stack in Azure based off of the agreement you signed, but for the most point in Azure, I'm going to want to compare the discount rate I'm getting from my Mac agreement, for example, versus the discount I'm getting for my RI or savings plan, and make my choice based off of that as well. So there are those kind of nuances with them. And then also, you know, Azure amortizes in their billing files based off of that 12-month rate. Every month's the same. Where AWS, GCP do it more. Hey, this is by the hour that it is getting applied. Are different nuances in how you look at the data, but also what decisions you can make when purchasing.
Interesting. You mentioned a Mac agreement. Just to make sure I'm clear, is that short for a Ryan McIntyre agreement?
Always.
Okay.
I'll take one of those.
Okay. Well, Michael, since you were just weighing in there, I've got a question for you too. Based on your background, you've been in cloud for a long time, very long time. Do you have any recommendations for folks that are new to purchasing committed use discounts? What are some of the bread and butter guidance you provide to somebody who may be new on considering this approach?
Yeah. The first piece is don't be afraid to make a commitment, even if you're going to have some unused. Unused RIs or savings plans are not necessarily a bad thing. I can still be generating savings even if I have 97% utilization on a commitment. So don't be afraid to get in there, start purchasing, and purchase small as you start out, right? Like reduce your risk by buying a few small purchases to kind of get your foot in the door, see how things flow through, And then as you go forward, you can layer those purchases in. And then I get to the point where I have purchases rolling off more frequently, making the risk of me purchasing something additional low, lower as things roll off, I can be more aggressive, right? So by making incremental purchases, not being afraid to purchase, I can reduce my risk and get my coverage up. Plus, starting off small, I can get people comfortable with what's happening, right? If I'm doing a chargeback method, someone's going to look at their bill in AWS and see that, hey, there's this great job, but I'm not taking into account the cost of the RIs because they show up in the account I purchased them in. And so as we get them used to, I have to add in the amortization. I have to add in the cost of that RI to my cost. It's not as much of a shock if you start off small and have those communications with teams. Like, yeah, you're going to see this reduction, but then you're also going to have this additional cost that we'll add back in. And some of the cloud providers make it easy for you to see that within their native tools. Other places it's more obfuscated, but making sure you have that good communication with both engineering and finance teams so that everybody's allocating out those costs. But as you get in, don't be afraid. Make smaller commitments as you want. Maybe don't do an all upfront. Do an all upfront. Just that way, depending on what you've got going on with cash, budgets, communicate with people what you're doing and get in there and do it. Don't overanalyze the data for months and months and months because you'll start losing based off the cost that you're paying on demand for those months.
May I throw in one little piece of
Yeah,
information?
please.
Do not give the cloud providers cash unless it's beneficial to you upfront. Just don't do it unless there's some reason for it. Just throw it out there.
How often do you see that scenario play out for anyone on the panel here, where folks are not making a decision because they don't want to make that incremental commitment mistake?
All the time.
Yeah, that's surprisingly often.
Yeah. Most of the time, especially when you're starting with someone who's newer to like the FinOps journey or something, they're afraid to make a commitment and they're afraid to go get buy-off from execs or the finance team and just take that little leap. Or the other thing, again, is people overanalyze the data. They're like, well, we've had this spiky usage and we have this dip here. Okay, buy 20% coverage. Get something going because the longer you wait to put your toe in the water, the more money you're leaving on the table.
And does that guidance apply to just larger consumers of cloud, say folks that are over $1 million in annual cloud spend, or does it really matter, the volume?
I'd say no. Even your smaller clients are going to be just as hesitant as larger clients. I mean, yes, for a large client, I might be making a $200 an hour savings plan commit versus a $30 an hour savings commit for someone smaller. But it's still the same hesitation there. Well, my spend's spiky, or what if I optimize in the future? Like, all these things do come into play, but you need to get something rolling.
And some of the cloud providers have different mechanisms that kind of assist with that. So Azure has a pretty flexible return policy on reservations and things. So if you make a commitment within Azure and it turns out you're overcommitted, you can exchange it for the SKUs that you need. So there's a lot less risk there. AWS, not so much. So it's more of like an Azure feature, but that does de-risk a lot of it. And also the point about smaller customers or smaller cloud spend per month. I think if you're working with a smaller business, maybe getting a discount sooner than later is more important because you have less buffer in your capital stream to allow you to absorb something that comes up out of nowhere. Essentially, if you're committed on a savings plan or a reservation, you're getting a predictable discount and you can use that money better somewhere else. Another thing, talking about the maturity of customers, like maturity, what I mean is a new customer off the street will join us and I'll take a look at their numbers. And one thing that I can usually see is they're very hesitant to buy reservation savings plans, any sort of a committed use coverage. That used to be a thing a long time ago. Like we had a very clear order of operations when we started kind of our FinOps journey, Michael and I, years ago. It was really like, okay, clean up everything, right size everything, shut everything down. And then as a last case, buy reservations against the things that were steady state running all the time. get a good discount rate on that. Anymore, really, I advise people to jump in, get a base level committed use discount going, like 20%. That's not going to really put you in a spot where you're down the road going to wish you hadn't done it, because you're going to be getting your short-term discount and it's way more predictable and you can absorb some fluctuations in usage. Lisa and Michael, what do you think when you're advising customers? Is 20% a good buy-in from base? Do you go straight for the throat and go for 90?
It's going to depend on the client and what they're running a lot of times.
I think 20 is too low, but that's just from what I've seen.
I mean, 20 is a good like toe in the water, right? If someone has no coverage, 20% gets them started and comfortable. And then you can really start doing that. Hey, every month or every 2 weeks, I'm buying the purchase, right? Because then they're comfortable with it next month. Okay, well, we'll get a little bit more aggressive. The other thing, talking about order of operations, paying attention to what they're running as far as generations. When I'm buying an RI, if you're on a new generation and your spend's increasing month over month, I am going to be more aggressive and say, yeah, like go ahead, go straight, to the 80, 85% coverage. You're running a bunch of older generation stuff. Well, maybe we back that coverage off and we talk about the plan to get you onto a newer generation, because most AWS RIs, I think it's 8 months for the break even on a 1 year. So a lot of people will take them that 8 months to get to the newer generation, because it's not just as easy as switching it over, especially if they're running a lot of legacy applications. It's a harder process to update your infrastructure. So focusing on the generations and not making just, hey, I'm going to make a bulk decision at the macro level. I can look at what different teams are doing as well. And I might have a team on a client that has two different groups, and one group's very advanced. They're using a lot of Fargate, a lot of Lambda. They're spinning it up and down all the time. They're very cloud centered. Yeah, we can be a little more aggressive in moving forward with them, finding that baseline where they're going to dip down. Maybe the other team's more, legacy. They don't really change a lot. They're running a lot of older stuff. Yeah, we're still going to get you that coverage, but we're also going to have more of those in-depth conversations. I like working with the guys that have the spikier spend more, because it's more of a game of where are our spikes and how much unused is acceptable before we get too low, right? But I'm always going to push for like 95% savings plan coverage, because it is so flexible. Unless you're going through a big decrease in spend, there's no reason not to get every penny you can get back from the CSPs.
Question for you, actually. How often do you see RIs on EC2 usage in AWS?
It's going to depend. With certain providers, if someone's using a third-party tool to manage it, you see it a lot more, because they have automation behind the scenes spinning up a bunch of micro purchases and moving them and selling them on the marketplace, that kind of thing. So if someone's using a third-party tool, I see it more frequently. If somebody is not using an automated tool, I see savings plans more. In AWS, the savings are kind of equivalent, one-for-one compute savings plan to convertible RI, EC2 to standard. So it's going to depend on their use case and what they're doing. I also see people who will layer in, like, hey, I've got a back office Windows application running that's going to get a lower savings rate on the savings plan anyways, and it's going to be running at this R5 2x large for the next 5 years. We're not going to touch it. Then they'll buy an RI on it, because then it guarantees you're getting some savings plan or savings for it, because AWS is following an order of operations when they apply a savings plan too, right? They're going to start with most restrictive resources and then greatest savings, and not just savings plans, RIs, right? So AWS follows that order of operations, most restrictive, greatest savings. And then, so if you have a group that's running all Windows and it's going to be steady state and you want to get them some savings, you can purchase an RI there and then have that savings plan cover the rest of your time.
Well, when I talked about the nuanced portfolio, I think this is demonstration alone of how complex it can quickly ramp into as you get into the details, which is great to talk about. I think what I'm taking away from the simple question of what is the recommendation for new folks, it sounds like it's pretty much universally take action quickly. There's more to lose by delaying and trying to perfect the numbers. Is that a fair assessment? And Lisa, does that make you cringe from a finance perspective? Is there a break even where the
No.
risk is worth the reward?
Now, a 20% coverage is nothing. In what case scenario is your compute going to go down by 80%? Right? Think about it that way. It's not, unless, well, the world ends and then, your cut is the least of your worries, right?
Well, you
Like,
heard it
that's
here.
fine. I don't care. Yeah. So no, yeah, absolutely. Just start and then get comfortable and then start finessing. Yeah.
Well, maybe that's a good segue, Lisa. While we've got you, what are some mistakes that you see happen? Are there any themes or trends that you've noticed with different customer environments or just patterns in the market of people purchasing committed use discounts?
So for me, I'm from a finance perspective. So I like to look at it from how the organization registers these instruments, right? And I have a client in the current environment past 6 months, right? A huge global macroeconomic risk, C-suite mandate. We need cost cutting. You have, everyone's like, okay, from an organizational perspective, it makes most sense to put the savings plan at the very top of the organization. That way you get the most discount, the most spend going through there organizationally from the top. Yes. But if you are a siloed organization with a finance department that's a black hole, it may be problematic. And it was for this one client because it turned out that that monthly recurring fee that fed a lot of other departments was paid by one department. So you've got the C-suite looking for everyone to cut costs. And then there's a spotlight. Why is everybody cutting cloud cost except for you? Now, you have been cutting, it's not your fault, but at the same time, it's a very uncomfortable place to be. And then you have to talk about, to people who don't understand cloud, how the RI fee works and how amortization works, and they may not want to listen to you. So bottom line is, before you start really getting into committed use discounts and high levels of coverage, understand how this affects your budget. How does this affect your particular group? Because if you are siloed, you may have issues just like that. So just understand what that is. And then you can move forward. In this group, they had to change things around. They had to move the savings plans into the silos so that they made sense.
Thanks for sharing that story, because I think that's one of the hard fought lessons learned in FinOps is seeing how these things play out, different decisions, and even on paper, if something looks a certain way, there may be some downstream effects that you need to kind of look towards. And I think that's why having the group here is so valuable, because not only do you bring different backgrounds and perspectives, but it's also fanned out across different environments and these different scenarios as they've played out.
Just saving the money isn't enough sometimes, right? Yeah, you save the money, but what about me?
What have you done for me lately, Michael?
Exactly.
Michael, on that note, how about you? Michael does so much for me. I jest. But Michael, from your perspective, mistakes, anything that stands out for you, either stories or again, patterns, things that you've noticed?
I mean, I've seen lots of different mistakes over the years. I've made mistakes over the years, but the pattern that sticks in my mind is someone says they're going to change something, so nobody wants to buy an RI against it. Right? I've seen where a client was going to decom a very expensive database cluster. It's costing like 30 grand a month. For a year and a half, they said they were going to decommission it, and it took them a year and a half to decommission. 8 months return or break even on your RI. So rather than having any coverage for that term, they ran it at on demand, right? So it's great to say I'm going to do something, but having realistic understandings of how long it's going to take you to do that. Because they knew like they were going to decom this, but in order to do that, they had to migrate everything, they had to test it, they had to build out all the new infrastructure. They knew it was going to take them at least a year by the RI. It's great that you're going to decommission it, but have that communication with the finance team like it's going to take us this long. So the finance can go buy the RI and you're paying a reduced cost. I would say waiting too long and lack of communication between teams are some of the biggest mistakes you'll make, not just in RIs and savings plans, but in FinOps in general, right? Like you need to be able to move forward and you need to break silos so you don't have items where I'm paying all the costs for everybody because nobody knows what to do with an RI. We should have those conversations at a macro level. And I should know as the finance team that you're going to decommission it, but you plan on taking a year to do so, because then I don't feel bad about going and buying that RI. Because Yeah, it's going to be decommissioned. Hey, maybe it's even going to take you 9 months to decommission. Great. I'm still past my break-even point. I'll have some unused at the end, but I've still generated savings. And so over the term of that RI, yeah, my last 2 months, it may go unused, but for the first 9 months, I got the savings. And so I have that savings. I have that reduced cost. Everybody knows what's going on, and that's the best path forward. So if you can communicate and then just not be afraid to take action, you'll overcome most of the common issues.
Yeah, there's a very real cost of inaction by sitting there on the sidelines doing nothing. You can, after the fact, go back and say, hey, we would have saved this much if we would have actioned this already. So that's a much harder thing to live down. I think having some proactive savings protection in the form of committed use does go a long way. Depending on the type, in Michael's case, so database clusters in AWS in particular, they're only coverable by reservations. So you're kind of locked in specifically on a SKU. But if you could take that reservation and share it with another team to cover like what Lisa was talking about, we're done with this particular workload. We're going to shift this RI over this other account. This other team can take it. You can asset transfer it internally through your finance team. You can do whatever, but you're still getting some level of coverage, some level of protection. You're avoiding the cost of inaction essentially.
There's also a benefit to certainty. You know what you're going to pay, and
Yeah.
that's a big deal.
Hmm. That's a great point. And maybe as the other side of this coin to the mistakes that have been seen, Ryan, what are some things that when you're working with a new client or you get airdropped in, what signals to you that there is proficiency, mastery, there is a good understanding of how this set of instruments work? Are there things that you look for or that jump out to you when you see an environment like that?
Well, we have some best practices. First of all, you have to get to know the customer and what their environment's doing. A lot of customers use third-party tools like a networking or an observability tool that essentially runs an EC2 instance or a VM like a virtual appliance. It's on 24/7. You can't really right size it or you fall out of compliance with the software vendor. They can't support you. So you're locked in at whatever you built this appliance as. So it may be 3 or 4 generations back, to brush on what Michael was talking about earlier. So you're kind of sort of locked in with this. If you're running that in on demand, you're really taking a hit. So in those kind of cases, what I recommend is for a virtual appliance that you know is going to run in this weird steady state, even though it's not optimized, throw an RI against it, because that's going to be your best way to cover it and recoup your costs, as opposed to a savings plan where you get the flexibility, but you don't get all of the discount that you could with an RI. So buy in on a specific RI in those kind of cases and then layer it with a savings plan on top of it. And then also one thing that Lisa mentioned, cloud providers love to take your money. So if you do an all upfront payment, like let's say I went crazy, won the budget lottery, and I threw down on some specific 3-year all upfront RIs, that's some baggage you're going to have to carry. So hopefully you really were happy with that configuration when you got it and you can get your money back. But if they're non-convertible, that becomes an asset that you have to live down. So let's say you're a year into your 3-year all up front with AWS and you get a C-suite directive. Hey, we're going to split off and go to GCP. We're going to go to Oracle. We're going to go multi-cloud. We're going to pull everything out of the cloud and go back on-prem. You have 2 years left on this agreement that you have to pay. Be careful. Be careful really when you're throwing money around like that. Lisa, you probably have all kinds of fun anecdotes about it's the end of a budget cycle. Let's all go on vacation. Let's buy something crazy. We got to spend it or we don't get it, you know?
We have to be careful with those things. Though, I mean, sometimes it's true, though. So that would be one case scenario where you would give Amazon your cash because you have to. But most of the times I'm like, there's somewhere much better where you can place that money.
I was going to draw a parallel to buying a bunch of Amazon gift cards because I know I'm going to buy stuff there anyway. And the irony of it's also Amazon. Hit me. Michael, you were going to say something too. Do you have a point of view?
No. Well, I have many points of view, but I don't think everyone wants to hear all of them. But no, to the upfront purchase, a lot of times where you see that also come in play is people have like an EDP commit and they're going to have a shortfall. So they'll rob Peter to pay Paul, so to say. So they make this year's, but they're reducing their spend for next year, right? Like that's one of the places.
It's a tomorrow problem, Mike.
Exactly.
Parlay.
Pushing it down the road. But then to Ryan's comment on, purchasing a 3-year RI, Willie, our VP FinOps, always says, 3 years is an eternity in the cloud. Cloud providers are putting out new resource types, new products all the time. And so purchasing for 3 years on a very specific SKU, unless you're real sure that that's going to be the SKU you're loving, it's better to go with savings plan or just a 1 year. But you have a convertible and like EC2 and AWS convertible. Azure, I can convert things and I can put so much back on the shelf every year. There is some cases where I have more leeway, but if I'm buying a Microsoft SQL Server RI on RDS, unless I know that box is going to be running for 3 years, I'm not going to buy a 3-year.
Well, Lisa, back to you. I want to get back to this topic, maybe because I'm just curious. If you were looking at a brand new cloud, new to you, we'll say, first lays your eyes on their cloud bills, what would signal to you that they have a good handle on committed use discounts? Are there things that you look for, details? Again, from your point of view, anything that jumps out tells you that they know what they're doing, they're cooking?
If they're paying for committed use discounts, then they're doing great. As a person, you can see how much they're paying on demand. All of that is laid out. I mean, from a finance perspective, it's very easy to see from their bills what they're doing.
Cool. How about you, Michael? If you see they purchased committed use discounts and there's 25% coverage, you're like, okay, well, at least there's something moving here. Is that good? What's good in your eyes? What's great?
Good, but it could be better. So honestly, if I go into a client, I see they got 25% coverage. I'm going to look at where they're getting their coverage, right? Like, is it one group that's buying coverage? Is it being purchased, at a corporate level? Are individuals making it? Because a lot of times what you'll see, especially as you go into larger organizations, you might have one group that's buying RIs versus their spend, and they have enough spend that it gets them 25% coverage across the board, but there's no corporate buy, right? RIs most effectively are managed at that corporate level with insight from the engineering teams, because each team has their little silo of, I know what I'm doing with my stuff, but maybe this team's only buying 2 RIs against a cluster that's running 4 because they're not sure they're going to keep the 2, but across the org, that SKU, you have 20. So rather than buying 2, I could be buying 17, right? And so I'll look at things like who's buying the RIs. I'll look at frequency of purchase, right? Like if they're buying once a year versus continually reviewing the environment and buying on a monthly cadence, right? Like that's a sign of maturity to be doing it more frequently because you have processes dialed in. You're probably meeting with your teams more frequently if you know what they're doing that you can purchase on that monthly cadence, right? You're going to be reducing risk because as 1 month comes by, I have RIs rolling off. I can either purchase to rebuy, I might be purchasing more, might be changing SKUs. So those are all things I'm going to look at. I'm not just going to look at your coverage. I'm going to hope that if you're coming into the cloud and you're on a FinOps journey at all, you have some coverage, right? Like that's easy button number 1 is get some coverage. But then I'm going to start, okay, like how do we get you further down that journey to where you are running? And that's going to take, more analytics, more frequently, more buy-in from engineering teams on what they're doing, but then also corporate buy-in to start managing that at a macro level.
That's a lot of hard work.
You mentioned too, Michael, earlier, and I think we've been touching on this theme throughout, is around communication and communication between teams. And I'm curious, so first, it sounds like that's going to be one of the hallmarks of a high-performing team when making committed use discounts, as well as all other FinOps functions. But I'm curious too, how does that play into the sequencing of events? And I know it was talked about throughout the session here so far when to purchase committed use discounts versus when to optimize your usage. There are some trade offs. Do you have any perspective maybe on that sequencing and how that works well when making the decisions of making your committed use discounts?
Yeah. So you're going to want to look, we've talked about looking at the sizes people are running, what they're doing. We've talked about knowing, if people are going to shut something down or spin something new up. So having that communication is definitely key. If you're not meeting with individual business units monthly for your larger ones, maybe quarterly for smaller ones, right? Like you're going to miss the details of what they're doing. There's that whole understanding of shifting left. So you understand as new applications are coming on, being part of that as the FinOps team, you know, doing the analytics and the sizing and all that stuff. All that comes into play in my RI strategy or my savings plan strategy, because then I do know that this team is going to be running the old Windows server that they can't shut down, and it's going to be that way for 2 years. So I'm going to go ahead and buy an RI against it, because then I get them some savings where if I'm not talking to anybody, I'm going to buy savings plans because savings plans are flexible. Go ahead and change what you want to change. I'm going to still get my coverage, but that team's not going to get any coverage. So to Lisa's point, well, the CEO looks down and says, well, you're the glaring spot no one's optimizing. Well, the rate optimization came from the savings plan. I can help you out by getting you an RI. Now, Windows versus Linux, I'm not going to get the same discount, right? Because the cloud providers will discount Linux or any operating system where the licenses aren't a big fee like Windows is. I'm going to get a bigger discount there. And so I can go ahead and say, hey, I can get you something. Eventually, we want to work through, is there a more efficient way to do this, right? Are they running later generations? Is there a way to get them off Windows and onto something like Linux? Can I move you to Graviton? All these decisions come into play, but I'm going to start with just understanding what you're doing. And then we will make a strategy fit what you're doing, your timelines. If you're going to be spinning up for a large event that's going to happen in 6 months, well, maybe I know that I have RIs expiring in 7, so I'm going to get really aggressive with my coverage now, knowing that I have that shorter term growth, so I can be highly covered now. And then afterwards, I might have a month or so where utilization isn't great, but then I have a bunch of stuff rolling off, and it's going to put my utilization right back where it should be, so I can purchase for that growth in a short-term period, even though I have to buy a 1-year minimum term for my RI or savings plan. So understanding those growth patterns and looking at when things are rolling off, right? Like if I'm going to do a bunch of right sizing and I have a bunch of RIs that are specific to a family in size, I'm going to wait till we're getting closer to that 8-month period before I want to see people start executing against that right sizing, right? Or maybe I have one team that's going to be migrating into a product. I'm not necessarily going to buy my RIs at 80% coverage the month they move into that product, because there is going to be some kind of right sizing that generally happens after I move into a new product. The communication and understanding what teams are doing and being able to use that to create a timeline and kind of pay attention to your roll off schedule and how your spend's increasing or decreasing is going to all come into play with the best practices of when and how to purchase your committed use discount.
Points. And I know we're coming up on our time here. So maybe Ryan and Lisa will cover off on this topic as we close out today. I'm curious, Ryan, from your perspective, coming from that engineering background, sequencing these recommendations, do you have any pointers for how to get the best effect, taking into account the risk reward of committed use discounts along with the engineering activities of optimizing usage first?
Yeah, do something sooner than later. Refactoring things after they're already in production is a monstrous pain in the ass. So if you're running a machine that's 2 generations behind, it's running Windows and it's on it's on an Intel CPU instead of an AMD or a Graviton, fixing that in post is going to be a real bear. So like at least do some sort of coverage. Lisa and I talked about this recently, shifting left. So from an engineering perspective, we want to see everything run fast. We want to see it, reports crunch faster. We want to see all the cool things that can happen. But once things hit production, you can't really touch them. You got to get downtime. You got to get all this fun stuff. So It makes it a lot easier if you're going to plan with the end goal in mind before you deploy everything on on a bad setup. Like, we know we're going to kick out Windows and go to Linux anyway. Why don't we plan for that in the short term and then maybe cover it with some committed use while we're at it?
And how about you, Lisa, from the finance background, sequencing these events, any perspective from your end?
If something's cheaper to start with, all the better. Make it as cheap as possible, and then you have your baseline spend, and then you can, throw your commitment on top of that. It's just basic finance math.
Simple as. Simple as.
as.
Well, thanks so much for the whole group here for taking time out of your day. Thank you, MJ, for pulling those strings and getting this together. I hope if you watched this, you found it useful. Do let us know. Leave us a comment, smash like, whatever MJ instructs you to do and post here. Please do. If you want to see more of these, let us know and we'd be happy to make some. Till next time.
Later.
All right.